When I was a kid, I remember the first time I ever heard about Japan's so-called lost decade. It has since become multiple lost decades, but when I was a kid, that was a fascinating concept for me. Um, when I was in middle school, a lot of the Southeast Asian countries were in a mess at the time. And it became very popular to laugh at a lot of Asian Americans. I talked about in another video how when I was in 6th grade, a classmate had bullied me over being Asian, and he thought he could have his way on me. And we both got in big trouble one time. Go watch that video. But it turns out the whole world has been in a recession for at least 50 years. At least 50 years. In 1969, when we first walked on the moon, GDP was $2.7 trillion. At the time, gold was $35 an ounce. Let's figure out how many ounces of gold that was. 2.7 trillion divided by 35. We used to produce that many ounces of gold of economic activity every year. 77 billion. Try to remember that number. And then in 2020, this doesn't even account for COVID-19. Oh, this only goes up to 2019. So even before COVID, we had a GDP of about $88 trillion. $88 trillion divided by, I think gold just crossed 2,000. And when you're ready, oh, did I miss a few zeros? 88,000 million billion trillion divided by 44 billion. We used to produce 77 billion ounces of gold, and now we produce 40 billion. So this is a lost half century at least. We haven't grown since we walked on the moon. We had some pretty good growth before that, right? Gold was fixed at this point, right? And we went from 1.3 trillion up to 2.7 trillion, right? So ever since we've departed the gold standard, can you imagine if we continued at this rate of growth? We were doubling per decade relative to gold, right? And over the last 50 years, instead of doubling every decade, which would have been 32 times, right, in 50 years, instead of doubling every decade, we lost half of our GDP. Right, so imagine that. Imagine the economy being 64 times what it is today, right? Can you imagine if I had a computer that was 64 times more powerful? I have 64 gigabytes of RAM on here, right? I just can't fathom what the computer would be capable of doing, right? It would almost certainly be playing backgammon perfectly, right? But more importantly, it could do some contact tracing for COVID-19. We could wipe out COVID-19 in no time. I could sit at home and run the algorithm for that, right? We could distribute that computation, right? There could be big rewards for people who are willing to distribute that that computation at home, right? Can you imagine how quickly? You wouldn't even see it, right? Before you could do it, somebody else would have taken. That's why Bitcoin, right? Mining is so hard, right? Because there's a lot of competition to do it. What else would you wish for it to be 64 times? Can you imagine if cars were 64 times better? Like gas mileage, I get 40 miles a gallon or it's rated for 40 miles a gallon. I usually get 50 to 60 because I'm a very moderate driver. But can you imagine getting like thousands of miles a gallon, right? I could drive to, right now I'm living in Missoula, but I probably have to go home to Seattle at some point, right? I could make that drive on like a few drops of gas, right? If we had that kind of growth over. What else do you wish to be 64 times? Can you imagine living in a home 64 times bigger? Right now, I'm sharing a house with a few housemates. I just can't fathom living in a place 64 times this area, right? I wouldn't want to because it would be a nightmare to maintain the place, right? Although if the economy is 64 times better, we could probably do something about that, right? Can you imagine traveling 64 times the distance every time you fly? Like right now, instead of just flying around the world, you could probably go to the moon and back a few times, right? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine? What else do you want to multiply by 64 in your life? Oh, my data plan, right? When I'm hiking and I want to listen to or watch a podcast, right? Can you imagine having 64 times better data? Look around. What else? My camera. When I zoom in to take pictures of the night sky, I can get 50x zoom on my camera. 64 times that. Can you imagine zooming in 3,000 times and getting the same kind of photo quality? I could zoom in on a mountain on Mars and almost be like I was there, right? I'll let you think about what else in your life you wish to have multiplied 64 times. That's what you could have had if we had stayed on the gold standard.